Lost in the Woods. A Girl's Encounter with a Witch. The woods swallowed Olivia whole, each step dragging her deeper into an abyss of darkness and uncertainty. What began as a harmless venture into nature, a weekend escape from the relentless clutches of city life, had spiraled into a desperate quest for a way back. The tall pines loomed overhead, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers, blocking out the light and casting an eerie shadow that lengthened with the sinking sun. With every rustling leaf and snapping twig, Olivia clutched the straps of her backpack, feeling the pounding of her heart synchronize with the forest's whispers. She had been walking for hours, or perhaps days. Time seemed to stretch unrealistically, taunting her with moments of clarity that faded just as quickly as they appeared. Thoughts of her friends, seated around a campfire, beckoned her back, but the woods had a way of pulling her further away from reason. Just as despair began to settle like fog in her heart, Olivia stumbled upon a clearing. In that small glade, obscured by the encroaching trees, stood a log cabin, its slouched chimney expelling curls of smoke into the dying light. From a distance, it seemed quaint, a sanctuary from the chilling air. But as she approached, a shiver raced down her spine. The place resonated with an unsettling energy, as if it was both a refuge and a prison. Knocking hesitantly on the door, Olivia was met with a creaking sound so loud it echoed in the silence that enveloped her. Moments later, it swung open. The woman who appeared seemed old as the woods themselves. Her skin was wrinkled and sallow, her gray hair tumbled in wild curls like vines surrendered to the forest's embrace. Her eyes were piercing, gleaming with a strange light that seemed to know Olivia's inner fears. "Come in, dear," the witch beckoned with a voice smooth yet abrasive, laden with secrets and ancient knowledge. "You look lost." The air inside was thick, suffused with the scent of something sweet yet rot-like, inducing a profound unease. Despite her instincts pleading with her to flee, Olivia stepped over the threshold. Once inside, the cabin revealed itself as a labyrinth of could-be comforts, yet fundamentally twisted. Pots and peculiar jars lined the shelves, each containing muddled concoctions brimming with strange ingredients. A cauldron bubbled softly in the corner, the sound reminiscent of something breathing, and it swayed like a heartbeat. "Sit," the witch commanded, gesturing to a battered chair. The old woman moved gracefully, somehow seeming to glide across the rickety floorboards, her age-defying movements disconcertingly fluid. Olivia complied, compelled by an urge she couldn't explain, a need to uncover the truth behind the woman's unnerving presence. "How did you find my home?" the witch inquired, perched atop the edge of an equally worn table, legs crossed. Few stray so close without being invited. I just got lost," Olivia stuttered, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of those aware eyes. It felt foolish to admit the simplicity of her predicament. The witch stared as if trying to peel away the layers of her soul, and once again, Olivia felt exposed. "Ah, but lost is a matter of perspective. Is it not the human disposition to wander?" The witch smiled, not a warm expression but one that carried an unspoken threat within it. "I didn't mean to trespass," Olivia replied defensively, memories of fairy tales and warnings dancing through her mind, stories of naive young girls swallowed by witches. "I just wanted to find my friends." "Friends," the witch echoed, drawing the word out thoughtfully. "What is a friend in the woods? What is a friend, if not a guide leading you deeper into the thicket of life?" Olivia felt the chill return, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I need help finding my way out." "But what if you're not meant to leave?" she replied, her voice lowering to a whisper that was nearly drowned by the bubbling cauldron. "What if this very moment is what you've been searching for? What if you are a mere reflection of your choices? What does that even mean?" Olivia's voice cracked, a trickle of desperation tinting her tone. "It means," the witch leaned in, her face eerily close. "It means that every path you have taken led you here, to me. Consider, there are those who darken the forest with their presence, clashing against nature, and yet, there are those, like you, who seek understanding and remain ignorant of the consequences." The witch reached for a jar, pulling out a handful of dry herbs that glistened in twilight's grasp. With shadowy fingers, she began to sprinkle them into the cauldron. "I can help you find your way back," she promised, yet Olivia sensed the trickery in her words, a binding contract laced with dark magic. "But it will come at a price." "What price?" "Only a small piece of yourself, your fear, your doubt, your humanity. Many wander lost because they are scared." The witch's eyes glimmered dangerously. "Do you not wish to be free? To embrace the wilderness and banish your shortcomings?" Olivia shuddered. She realized then that she stood at a precipice, a delicate verge between two worlds. The idea of giving up a part of herself to escape the clutches of the forest brought forth a turmoil in her gut. The loss of humanity, it felt monstrous. "There is more to fear than fear itself, child," the witch continued, voice smoldering with dark persuasion. "Will you face your demons or succumb to them?" The air grew heavy, thickening around Olivia as she felt the weight of the decision spiral within her. The trees outside seemed to loom closer, their roots crawling toward her, hungry for her spirit. Was this her fate, to be devoured by the forest or the witch? She hesitated, battling between desperation and self-preservation. The witch's expression morphed into something truly menacing, contorted by the layers of darkness surrounding her. "The forest can be unkind to those who do not embrace their fears. Poverty begot by fear is no life at all. I don't want to give up anything." "Then you will remain lost." Olivia's breath quickened. Shadows conspired around her, brushing against her skin and filling her mind with the whispers of years past. Her heart thumped against her ribcage like a caged animal, yearning to escape. The witch stood unwavering, a statue carved from the remnants of many souls who had traversed this dark path before her. In that moment, a clarity washed over her, a realization that the woods were a mirror reflecting her inner chaos, doubt, and despair. What she feared was not the witch before her, but the very fragments of herself she avoided, the corners of her mind she dared not explore. "Perhaps. I'm not ready," she admitted, voice barely a whisper, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "Then you will suffer the wood's wrath, child. You will wander unanchored, listening to the cries of those like you, forever seeking a way out." With an anguished heart, Olivia stood, rage and fear swirling into a storm within her. As she opened the cabin door to leave, she could feel the very fabric of the world around her shift, thoughts of survival coursing through her veins. Stepping back into the cool embrace of twilight, she heard the witch's laughter resonate behind her, a haunting echo that danced with the wind. Olivia plunged forward into the darkening forest, her path uncertain but her spirit strong. The woods were vast, but now they burdened her with questions instead of shackles. If she would remain lost, she would at least be lost on her terms, seeking, exploring, battling her own shadows. In the heart of horror, she found herself, a path not yet walked but one that beckoned her with the promise of truth beyond fear. Olivia knew now that being lost was merely the start of her journey, and somewhere within those haunting woods lay the fragments she had yet to embrace. Followed by shadows. The clock struck midnight, its rhythmic chime echoing through the quiet streets like a warning bell. Emily tugged her cardigan tighter around her, the late autumn chill creeping into her bones as she walked toward her car. After another grueling late shift at the hospital, all she wanted was to sink into the warmth of her bed. The streets, usually vibrant with life, were now draped in shadows, their presence oppressive and stifling. The glow from the streetlights flickered like dying stars, casting elongated shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. She shrugged off the disquieting sense of being watched, blaming it on exhaustion and the knowledge that things often felt more sinister in the dark. The soles of her shoes thudded against the asphalt, each step pulling her further into the heartbeat of the night. As she approached her car, a guttural instinct prickled at her skin. She glanced over her shoulder but only saw the sprawling emptiness of the parking lot. An unsettling sensation tugged at her stomach. It was almost as though the darkness had shifted, an unseen presence weaving through the alleyways. She shook her head, forcing herself to dismiss the thought. After all, this was a city she had known for years. There was safety in familiarity, or so she believed. Sliding into the driver's seat, the world outside seemed to close in around her. The dull thrum of her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she started the engine, the car sputtering to life and pushing back against the overwhelming silence. She pulled out of the parking space and headed toward the main road, the headlights piercing the veil of darkness, illuminating the solitary facade of the closed shops and faceless buildings. But tonight, the streets felt different. The air was thick with an unshakable tension. She couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, as though a shadow lingered just beyond her line of sight. Whenever she glanced in the rearview mirror, she expected to see something lurking behind her, and yet it remained empty, save for the dull reflection of her own frightened eyes. As she drove, the feeling intensified. A glance to the right revealed nothing but darkness, yet she was certain a shadow danced alongside her car, skimming the edge of her peripheral vision. Anxiety gripped her insides. It was not just a shadow cast by the streetlights but something more primal, an entity that thrived on fear. The farther she traveled, the more oppressive the darkness became. As she turned into her quiet neighborhood, the familiar intersection loomed ahead yet shrouded in an air of foreboding. She breathed deeply, attempting to steady her nerves, but just as she approached the entrance to her street, her headlights caught movement, a dark figure darting between the trees that flanked her route. Nothing, she muttered under her breath, trying to convince herself. She flicked the radio on to fill the car with sound, a desperate attempt to drown out the silence that suffocated her. But the music felt hollow, as if mocked by the stillness surrounding her. It was no good. She couldn't shake the sensation that she was not alone. Suddenly, she felt the chilling embrace of terror drip down her spine. The shadow, the incessant presence she had tried to ignore, was no longer a figment. It stalked her now, undeniable and relentless. The moment she parked the car, her heart sank. With trembling hands, she fumbled to turn off the engine and opened the door. The night air was crisp, but it carried whispers that crawled along her skin like bony fingers. She locked the car instinctively, the sound of the door clicking echoing in the stillness. Each step toward her front door felt like she was wading through molasses, the weight of dread clinging to her. Emily glanced around, her eyes searching the shadows, but finding only the vague outlines of her neighbors' houses, still and unyielding. But then there it was, a flicker of movement, a shadow flickering near the edge of her vision. She wheeled around, heart racing, desperation clawing at her throat. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice trembling, swallowed by the darkness. Silence answered her. With a frantic surge of courage, she raced for the door. Fumbling with her keys, she finally slipped one into the lock and turned it, bursting inside with a gasp. The threshold slammed behind her, sealing the darkness out and barricading her against the potential horrors waiting outside. The house was dim, only the glow of the streetlight filtering through the window illuminating the edges of the room. She leaned against the door, trying to catch her breath, but as her heart slowed, her nerves began to scatter with a torrent of questions. Was it merely her imagination? Had she truly been followed? Suddenly, a thump resonated from the back of the house, shattering the fragile tranquility. Emily jumped, instinctively reaching for her phone on the kitchen counter, heart hammering in her chest. She tiptoed toward the sound, peering into the darkness that draped every room. "Hello?" she shouted, forcing her voice to be steadier than she felt. The silence that followed was deafening, and the shadows seemed to stretch beyond reason, reaching toward her like desperate hands. As she approached the door to the basement, another thud echoed from below, sending chill waves coursing through her veins. Emily knew she should call the police, but something rooted her to the spot. What if it's just my mind playing tricks? Taking a step back, she turned and began to move toward her phone, when suddenly, a low growl resonated from the basement, dirty and guttural, reverberating through the walls and vibrating in her bones. The sound hijacked her thoughts, and her breath shuddered from her lips in fear. Without thinking, she yanked open the basement door and flicked on the light switch, the bulb sputtering to life with a reluctant pop. The stairs descended into an abyss of gray and grime, shadowed corners lurking like hunched figures cloaked in malice. Yet, driven by a mixture of terror and determination, she took a step, followed by another, each footfall seeming to echo her heart's racing pulse. Just as she reached the bottom, the floor creaked beneath her. A figure emerged from the deeper shadows, a leering silhouette that sent shockwaves of horror through her. The shape was broad, out of focus, but unsettlingly familiar, a manifestation of her fears, an evil reflection bearing down upon her. In that moment, Emily realized that her midnight follower was not a raving lunatic or a stranger waiting to prey upon her, but something far more insidious. The shadows were born of her own haunted past, memories of losses and regrets that had lingered like a specter. Instead of seeking refuge in the light, she had remained in the dark, allowing it to swallow her whole. Her breath hitched as the figure stepped closer, and she finally recognized the truth. It wasn't merely a shadow that had been stalking her through the night, it was her own unwillingness to confront the shadows within her, the darkness she had refused to acknowledge. It wanted her to remember, to face it head-on and reclaim the light she once held dear. But as the darkness congealed, stretching its fingers toward her, Emily realized that she was not ready. Not yet. With a scream that shattered the quiet, she turned to run, racing up the stairs and slamming the door behind her, blocking her memories, her shadows, beneath the floorboards where, for now, they could stay. Emily sank to the floor, her back against the door, trembling and panting. The shadows could wait, she had chosen to face the light, even if it meant leaving the truth in darkness, for only time would reveal if she was brave enough to confront that shadow when it returned. Fractured reflections. The night was a swathe of darkness, sprawled over the cracked pavement of Route 86 like an oppressive shroud. Harold Kessler gripped the steering wheel of his aging Chevy sedan, the dim glow of the dashboard casting eerie shadows across his weary face. Work had been an endless grind of late, fatigue hung on him like a heavy coat. He wasn't in the mood to listen to the radio tonight. The static-mired airwaves were only a reminder of his dwindling sanity as he navigated the lonely stretch of highway, surrounded by vast fields that seemed to stretch on forever. It was a stretch he often traveled but never so late. The headlights of his car carved through the obsidian night, illuminating the road just enough to tease his senses. As he drove, the world outside faded into a blur, a backdrop to the cacophony of his thoughts that spiraled deeper into darkness with every passing mile. Then, it happened. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting far off the road's edge. Distant and intangible, it ruptured his reverie like glass shattered underfoot. Just a deer, he muttered to himself, dismissing the instinctive jolt of alarm that spurred his heart into an erratic rhythm. But something about the shadow was wrong, primal. Even as his brain argued against the absurdity, a chill slithered up his spine, and he felt trapped, the weight of unnameable dread pressing against his chest. With a hard swallow, he steered into a curve, foot easing off the gas as he tried to shake the unsettling knot in his stomach. Confidence drained with every heartbeat as he eyed the peripheral dark. Perhaps it wasn't just a deer. But what else could it be? The haunting emptiness of the road pressed upon him, distortions fueled by fatigue and fear. Suddenly a light pierced through the gloom, and before he could react, it hit. The Chevy lurched violently, metal screaming against metal, a cacophony of destruction that resonated through his bones. Harold's body was thrown against the interior as his vision blurred, the world spiraling out of control. Glass shattered, a weathered frame crumpled, and for a flash of an instant, there was silence, an eerie pause in the chaos that left him suspended in time. When he finally regained his senses, he found himself slumped in the driver's seat, heart thrumming painfully against his ribcage. Staggering reality set in. The car had skidded to a halt, smothered by the starlit blanket above, but there was no one else here, no other vehicle had impacted his. Panic set in as he forced himself to inspect the wreckage, gingerly sliding out of the door that hung limply on its hinges. The breath caught in his throat as he tumbled out onto the asphalt. Desperation clawed at him as he stumbled away from the car. He could sense it, something still there, watching. Silence enveloped him, an undercurrent of hushed whispers intermingling with the faint rustle of grass in the breeze. The moonlight painted the scene in hues of silver and shadow, and every inch of the landscape seemed to explode with life, even in its stillness. Then, against the subtle rhythms of the night, he heard it, a low, guttural growl resonating from somewhere behind him. He turned slowly, dread pooling in his stomach. There, half glimpsed in the gathering shadows, was a figure. An elongated silhouette that twisted and warped, barely humanoid in form, as if reality itself had twisted. It was wrapped in darkness, a shroud of nebulous black that seemed to breathe like a living entity. Its eyes glowed, a pair of deep, burning coals that spoke to ancient horrors beyond comprehension. What is this? The question fled his mind, replaced by pure instinct. He knew right then that he was not alone, not in the way he wanted to be. Not just another unfortunate soul wandering these cursed roads. This was something else entirely. An entity from the recesses of his imagination, a nightmare made flesh. Harold stumbled backward, heart racing, and in his panic, he glanced at the car. His sanctuary turned prison. The figure seemed to draw closer with each heartbeat, emerging from the shadows as if birthed by the fear that saturated the air. His eyes darted to the rear of his car, its trunk stood ajar, revealing a glimpse of something else. An eloquently crafted charm hung from the rearview mirror, twisting softly in the breeze. It was in that moment, realization clawed at him, it had been there before, a trophy from an unremarkable day. He could almost hear the laughter of his friends from that afternoon's barbecue. And the unholy figure was born from his own trepidation, from the careless choice to carry relics tied to old memories. As he struggled to breathe, every instinct told him to run. But where could he go? He was trapped in the grip of the inhuman presence that hungered for something deeper than the flesh. "Leave me alone," he begged, instinct screaming to compel him to flee, but the ground was luminous with dread. The shadows melted around him, warping his surroundings until they twisted into grotesque shapes. The fields appeared to vibrate, alive with sin and treachery. In the distance, flashing lights flickered like fireflies, taunting him, as though the world beyond this horror had no bearing on his fate. The air thickened and stilled. The creature crept ever closer, its gaze never leaving Harold's face, a predator appraising its prey. Time dissolved into a fluid motion, the world swirled in faint echoes of laughter and jangling metal as he succumbed to the inescapable realization that he was never alone. The shock of collision had awakened something deep within him, not another car, but itself, a lurking shadow born of regret, a consequence of past choices embodied in this entity now ominously present. With a deafening roar erupting from the being, the night consumed him without hesitation. The echoes of his terror blended into the fabric of darkness, and he was lost, consumed whole, not just in body, but in mind and spirit. The relics of the mundane faded into oblivion. Harold was just another whisper on Route 86, becoming part of the eternal night, leaving behind a broken car, a wreckage thrumming with the haunting echoes of a soul that dared to remember. The lurker at Hollow Lake. The campfire crackled, its warm glow illuminating the faces of the campers, casting long and sinister shadows across the forest. Beyond the dim circle of light, darkness enveloped Hollow Lake, a place notorious for the strange happenings that echoed through whispers around the campfire. It was said that a mysterious shadow lurked over the lake at night, creeping closer as the sun sank behind the hills. Jess, a seasoned camper and thrill-seeker, leaned in closer to the fire. "Anyone want a midnight swim?" she challenged, grinning devilishly as the firelight flickered across her freckled cheeks. Her friends, Ryan, Mia, and Tessa, exchanged glances, apprehension dancing in their eyes. "No way. The water is freezing this time of year," Mia protested, but Jess's daring spirit was infectious. They all reluctantly shuffled to the edge of the lake, peering into the inky depths. The water mirrored the starlit sky, but something darker lurked beneath. Tessa felt it, a weight in the air, a tension that prickled her skin. As Jess plunged into the chilling water, laughter erupted, masking the unease that hung overhead. But then, the laughter stilled, replaced by an uneasy silence. It was as if the lake swallowed their joy whole. Jess emerged from the water, forcing a laugh. "You're all such wimps." But as her eyes adjusted to the dark lake, the mood shifted. Something moved beneath the surface, silently, ominously. Her laugh died in her throat as she caught a glimpse of it, a shadow darting just beneath the waves, circling the surface with a predatory grace. "Guys," she called out, an edge of fear creeping into her voice. But before anyone else could respond, a loud splash erupted from the lake, sending a spray of water into the air like a foul omen. Jess felt an icy hand wrap around her ankle, pulling her down, dragging her into the murky depths. Panic surged through her as she struggled against the pull. Ryan bolted into the water, shouting, "Hold on, Jess." He dove beneath the surface, searching frantically for her, but found only shadows swirling in the depths. Above, Mia screamed, her voice sharp against the quiet of the night as Tessa rushed to the shore, frantically throwing a life preserver toward the churning water. But the darkness seemed to consume the lake, swallowing their desperate cries. Suddenly, Jess's head broke the surface, gasping for air, terror etched across her pale face. She pointed frantically beneath the water. "Something's down there." With a surge of adrenaline, Ryan grasped Jess's arm and began dragging her toward the safety of the shore. But just as they made the shallows, Jess screamed again. An enormous, shadowy figure plunged from the depths, surfacing just behind Ryan, its massive shape rippling like liquid night. "Watcher! The lake's watcher!" Tessa shrieked, eyes wide in horror, as the thing erupted from the water, talons glistening in the starlight. It had no discernible form, just an amalgamation of darkness and twisted features, eyes glowing with an unnatural light that pierced the void of night. It lunged toward them, desperate to reclaim its prey. The campers scrambled up the shore, hearts racing, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they sprinted toward the safety of the campfire. Jess screamed again, "We have to get the others." In the chaos, Mia was caught at the edge of the light as it flickered above, the darkness swirling around her like a living entity. "No!" Tessa shouted, lunging back, but Ryan pulled her away. They couldn't lose anyone else. Jess's heart twisted as she heard Mia's voice vanish into a deep, echoing silence, leaving only the lake rippling ominously behind them. "We need to leave now," Jess cried, her voice rising above the chaos as they sprinted to the trail leading from the lake. But the shadow followed, gliding across the surface, extending towards them like a long, dark arm. In their frenzy to escape, Jess suddenly tripped, sprawling onto the ground. Ryan halted to help her, but as he extended his hand, the shadow lunged, seizing Jess's leg, pulling her backwards, dragging her toward the waiting darkness. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound, and in that moment, the forest came alive. The trees seemed to creak and moan, simultaneously reaching out, as if trying to prevent the horror from devouring her. "Fight it, Jess!" Ryan bellowed. Grasping her arms with all his strength, he pulled against the shadow's grip, feeling as if he were trying to wrestle a hurricane itself. The darkness recoiled slightly as it strained against the pull of the forest. Something was waking. With all her strength, Jess lunged forward, clawing at the ground as she felt the shadow beginning to yield. It howled in rage, releasing her at last as she joined Ryan on the solid earth, limbs trembling from the effort. Still, it wasn't over. Tessa grabbed them, yanking them toward the campfire as the trees screamed in warning, the eerie silence now filled with the malevolence of the lake. They reached the campsite, the fire now a small beacon of safety flickering against the night. Heartbeats thundered in their ears as they stumbled into the light, but the darkness loitered at the edge, as if waiting for another inviting moment before claiming what it was owed. What was that? Tessa panted, eyes wide, face pale as she clutched Jess's arm. I don't know, Jess whispered, trembling uncontrollably. The lake's presence loomed behind them, a dark, unfathomable whisper urging them closer. As dawn broke, revealing the light of a new day, the shadows retreated, leaving only the mirror-like lake reflecting a peaceful facade. But they all knew, beneath those glass-like waters, the truth lay sleeping, waiting for the sun to sink again. Each night, as darkness fell, they could hear its whispers, could sense its watchful gaze. And though Hollow Lake might seem calm, the horrors that lay beneath its surface were ever watching, always waiting for the next pair of legs to dip into their shadowy domain. Tides of Thirst. The small town of Edenton lay nestled against the edge of a dark forest, its streets winding like a forgotten whisper, harboring secrets best left undiscovered. Among the crumbling brick buildings and remnants of a better time, there stood an old well, its stones coated in a dampness that had long since turned to rot. It had been years since anyone thought to draw water from it, but on that oppressive summer evening, the sky a bruised violet, something stirred. I stood at the well, the last rays of daylight slipping away, casting elongated shadows over the town. The air felt different, charged with a heaviness that only whispered hints of dread. My throat burned with thirst, an insatiable craving that gnawed at me relentlessly. Beneath the rustling leaves, the forest whispered its own warnings, yet I ignored them, driven by an urgency that felt almost primitive. I peeled back the gnarled wooden cover, the creaking sound echoing in the quiet dusk like a macabre invitation. I peered into the depths of the well. It was impossibly dark, an abyss that seemed to draw me in. I gripped the rusted bucket and lowered it slowly, the sound of water splashing somewhere within echoing with a strange finality. When I finally drank, the water was warmth that spread through me like wildfire. It tasted different, foreign, the sweetness of rot mingled with earthy minerals. My craving only intensified, thrumming just beneath my skin. For the first time in weeks, my aches finally began to fade, but something else rolled in their wake, like fog creeping over the land. It was the faintest tendril of hunger. A hunger for flesh. I staggered back from the well, the contours of reality shifting in and out of focus. My heart drummed a frantic cadence as I fought to understand what was happening to me. I squeezed my eyes shut, inhaling deeply, the smell of wild honeysuckle tangled with decay wafted to my senses. I hoped to dismiss the feeling rising within me, but the taste lingered, the tantalizing warmth of flesh that seemed suddenly so necessary. Days drifted by, marked by a strange, growing insatiability. I avoided the well, but the whispers from its depths called to me. They echoed throughout my bones, a sinister allure I couldn't shake. The townsfolk began to notice changes in me. They would walk hurriedly past, casting wary glances in my direction. One night, I caught a fleeting glimpse of reflection in the shop window. My pupils had widened, nearly swallowing whole the whites around them. Where was the vibrant gleam of life? The shadows had crept in too closely, cloaking me in something darker, something that felt monstrous. As my cravings sharpened, dreams overtook me. Visions of meat dripping with blood haunted my waking moments. Desperate faces of those I loved morphed into marbled slabs of flesh, calling me with their innocence guised in sanguine temptation. I would wake in a cold sweat, the scent of iron lingering on my lips. One night, while tossing and turning in fevered sleep, I ventured out into the night, a ghost haunting the hushed streets. The moon, a voyeuristic witness, illuminated my path toward the well that had become my obsession. I crouched low, heart racing as I peered into the inky blackness once more. Clarity struck like a lightning bolt. The essence wasn't simply about meat, it was raw, unadulterated need, the thrill of the hunt. The well had not just quenched my thirst, it had awakened something primal, festering. I could almost hear it thrumming beneath the earth, a heartbeat that echoed the murmur of the forest, a promise of the meat I coveted. I sank to my knees, gasping as I pressed my palms against the cold, wet stones. The hunger twisted within me, transforming into an all-consuming lust, propelling me forward into the wild expanse. The place where it was said that no one returned, an ancient clearing thick with shadows. As I stood in the shadows under the twisted trees, I felt it, the pulse of the forest. A flicker of movement caught my eye. A deer stood at the edge of the thicket, its gentle brown eyes gleaming with alarm. My heart raced. It was beautiful, fragile, and oh, so delectable. The hunger roared to life in my chest, coursing through me like venom. I could almost taste its warmth, can almost feel the trampled soil underfoot as I stalked toward my prey. But with the first movement I made, something inside me recoiled at the thought. What was I becoming? The chilling realization broke through the veils of temptation. I was not a hunter, I was the hunted. Somewhere deeper in the gloom, I felt the whispers of the well catching up, reminding me that I had surrendered my autonomy to a need that gnawed at my soul. My fingers curled into fists, nails digging into my palms, and the intensity of my hunger waned into confusion and horror. Yet, the warmth began to pull at my memories again, images of flesh, soft skin, and desperate cries echoed in my mind. I staggered back, barely able to breathe as the frontiers of humanity and primal hunger blurred, almost melding into a coherent whole. In that secret starlit space, I made a decision. I turned back towards the town. As I left the thunderous heart of the forest, the shadows whispering promises of flesh behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, the safest kind of fear. Perhaps the water would always call to me, perhaps I would always feel that tantalizing draw toward the darkness. But I would not submit to it, not tonight, not while the moon's light could pierce the dread that clung to me so closely. As I walked home, struggling against my breath and the aching hollowness in my gut, I feared the moment I would return to the well. For it wouldn't just be the water calling to me, it would be something deeper, something more sinister, waiting to swallow me whole. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that the deadening thirst would one day win.